Welcome back to Line by Golf, the podcast made from the connections we find through the great game of golf. I'm your host Ross McGuire, and today I'm joined by Len Ferman, author, newsletter writer, and the man who calls himself the sports time traveller. Len has spent years diving into old newspaper archives to relive the great golf tournaments of the past, and he's turned that obsession into a book, Great Golf Tournaments Volume 1. Today we go back to some of the most dramatic finishes in golf history, the 75 Masters with Nicklaus, Miller and Weiskopf going head to head, the 72 Open at Muirfield where Trevino broke Tony Jacklin's heart, and all the way back to the 1922 Open Championship at Royal St George's. Let's go over to Len. Len Ferman, thanks for joining the show. Great to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Russ. It's a real honor to be here today.
The honour's mine, trust me. And Len, you call yourself the sports time traveller, so how did you pick that name for yourself and your work?
Well, I've always been interested in time travel, and I also love reading newspapers. And I figured out a way to put these two things together by reading newspaper archives, which are now available online. And so what I do is I go back to try to experience great sporting events from the distant past. I like to go back at least 50 years and experience events that maybe I actually saw when I was a kid, but more likely events that I never got to see that I'd really like to experience. And so I put this together and started calling it the Sports Time Traveler. I came up with an online newsletter that's called the Sports Time Traveler. And now I'm starting to take a lot of those articles and put them into books.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. And then you've got your own book around golf, so it's called Great Golf Tournaments Volume 1. How's this book different from prior books that have been published about golf and these tournaments? You know, what are the kind of things that are different about you?
So what's really different about this is I try to give the reader the feeling like they're back in time, actually following the tournament. And this is something I enjoy doing myself. So, like, for example, with the 1922 British Open, I didn't know much about the 1922 British Open, but by reading all the newspaper accounts of the 1922 British Open, I now feel like I actually experienced it myself. And I try to give the reader that same experience. So in the book, I've got 27 different golf tournaments that I went back to cover. The oldest one was the 1922 British Open. The most recent one was the 1975 Masters. And each one, you kind of get the feeling like you're there. And I take you through one day at a time what happened in the tournament, but from a perspective like it's taking place now.
Fantastic. And then, Len, we've kind of jumped straight into your book there. What about yourself? How did you get interested in golf, and how's this journey started for you, and how did you get to here?
Well, I started playing golf when I was 9 years old, and I started watching golf at a very opportune time in 1974 when Johnny Miller had his big run and won the first 3 tournaments of the year and 8 tournaments in one season on the PGA Tour. That wasn't done again until Tiger Woods in 1999. And so I became instantly hooked as a golf fan, watching every weekend, starting all the way back when I was 10 years old in 1974.
Brilliant. And then you mentioned the 1922 British Open, but we're going to start with the 1975 Masters. And in this tournament, you've got 3 chapters on this tournament. So what was so special about the 75 Masters in your mind, taking us back there?
Well, I watched it live, not at Augusta, but live on television, and it made such an impression on me that I've just never forgotten it. And I thought it was the greatest golf tournament I'd ever seen. And the real interesting thing about it was last year, before the Masters in April 2025, Golf Magazine wrote a piece about the 1975 Masters, and they said it's 50 years later and we've still never seen anything like the 1975 Masters. I think the thing about it was there was just such amazing drama, and CBS, the television network in the United States that covered it, did such a fantastic job covering the tournament. And you had the 3 hottest golfers in the world playing head to head coming down the final stretch. And it just made for, it played out like a movie script, a real life movie.
Brilliant. And then there's a couple of things historically in the first round that happened, and they were really widely celebrated. So, and one other went actually almost unnoticed. So what were those? And can you give some description of them?
So one thing happened that everybody knew was going to happen. It was a very historic moment. Lee Elder became the first black player ever to play in the Masters. It's hard to fathom now, but prior to the early 1970s, black players were excluded from playing in the Masters, even if they were qualified. And then Augusta National passed a new rule, I guess, saying that if anybody who won a PGA Tour event in the 12 months before the Masters, regardless of the color of their skin, was qualified to play. And Lee Elder had actually won the Monsanto Open in April of 1974. So he knew for almost the whole next year that he was going to be teeing it up in the Masters. And when he did tee it up, that was a very historic moment. So, but the other thing that happened is something nobody knew about at the time, but and I've kind of uncovered this. Now, one person knew about it, and that was Jack Nicklaus, because he did it. Jack Nicklaus, and the other person who knew about it was George Cunningham of the Atlanta Constitution newspaper. When he was interviewing Jack, Jack said to him, when you have 36 putts and shoot a 68, you have to consider it a good solid round. So Jack was happy with his round, shooting a 68 that put him one shot off the lead. Now, when I read that in the newspaper archives, I quickly did the math and realized, well, if you shot a 68 and you had 36 putts, that means you only took 32 strokes from tee to green. And I thought that was just quite unbelievable. And so I systematically pieced together from other newspaper accounts that he did in fact do this. So Nicklaus reached all the 4 par 3s on his tee shot. He reached all 10 par 4s in regulation. And get this, he reached all 4 par 5s in 2. And that gives you 32 strokes. It's like a perfect round from tee to green. The only thing better you could do would be to hole out one of those approach shots. Now, I've done a little bit of research, and I actually am friends with the PGA Tour official historian, and we can't find another time that anybody only ever took 32 strokes from tee to green. Jim Furyk, who has the record on the PGA Tour for an 18-hole round of 58, he took 34 strokes from tee to green when he shot his 58, just to give you an idea. So this was really historic. It's hard to call it a actual record because there's not enough data out there, but it is certainly one of the most incredible rounds in history.
And the funny thing, in modern times, that's essentially what Bryson DeChambeau was saying that he would be able to do to Augusta because of his length. It would effectively be a par 67 or 68. It hasn't turned out that way, unfortunately, for Bryson, but there you go. Jack Nicklaus was doing it in 1975. That's incredible, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And then you've got in the book as well, what happened early in the second round that got the crowd going?
So in the second round, Arnold Palmer had shot a 69 on the opening day. And this is Arnold Palmer way past his prime. He's 45 years old. He hasn't won a major since he won the 64 Masters 11 years earlier. So he had shot a 69 to be 2 shots off the lead after the first round. And he was one of the early had one of the early tee-off times in the second round. And he had a really good opening 9. He shot a 34. That brought him to 5 under for the tournament. And when the tournament leader from the first day, Bobby Nichols, bogeyed his first hole playing 2 hours behind Palmer, that put Arnold Palmer by himself at the top of the leaderboard. And that was a really magical moment for the fans to see Arnold Palmer back at the top of the leaderboard. And that lasted for about 45 minutes, but it was probably a very special 45 minutes for those people who were at Augusta seeing the leaderboard that day.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you got into golf through Johnny Miller and some of his play. Johnny Miller was the hottest player in the world going into that Masters. So what happened to him in the opening rounds?
So Miller, as you say, he was the hottest player in the world. He had won 11 times in the last 16 months, and Golf World magazine picked him. Golf World magazine picked him to win, and they put his picture on the cover of Golf World magazine, walking on water. And he got a lot of ribbing from the other golfers, and it must have rattled him because he got off to a disastrous start in the 75 Masters. He bogeyed 3 of the first 4 holes, and he shot a 75, and he was in danger of missing the cut And he came back with a 71 the second day, but he was still 11 shots back going into the weekend. So it really was looking very badly for Johnny Miller.
Wow. And then how did the overall leaderboard look after the second round in that Masters then?
Well, Nicklaus came in with a 67 after his 68 in the first round, and that gave him a 5-shot lead at 9 under. And a lot of the press were ready to award the green jacket to Jack Nicklaus right then and there. His 5-shot lead was over big names. Arnie managed to come in at -4 for the tournament. Billy Casper, a young Tom Watson, they were all tied at -4. And then you had Tom Weiskopf, who, besides Miller and Nicklaus, was probably the next hottest golfer in the world. He had won the week before, and he was 3 under, 6 shots behind Nicklaus. And Lee Trevino, a big name back then, who had won the last major, the PGA in 1974, was also at 3 under. So you had all these big names at the top of the leaderboard, but Nicklaus firmly in control with a 5-shot lead.
Fantastic. And Augusta National, I guess with them being the tournament where they decide the rules all the time, there was a dream pairing for the third round. So can you tell us about that dream pairing that Augusta National put together?
So Augusta National decided they're going to put Nicklaus and Palmer together in the final group for the third round. And this was great for the fans, but it wasn't so great for Nicklaus and Palmer. They did not like to play against in the same group because they seemed to always not play well. And it proved out again. Nicklaus, after shooting a 68 in the first round, a 67 in the second round, ballooned to 73. And Palmer, after a pretty good first and second round, shot a 75.
Wow, there you go. And then Johnny Miller, how did he get on? So he was more at the back of the field, I guess, getting into it and out ahead of Palmer and Nicklaus. How did he do in the third round?
So Miller, he was 11 shots back going into the weekend. So he's teeing off very early, two hours ahead of that final group. And he pars the first hole, and then he birdies the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh holes. He birdies 6 consecutive holes. That's a Masters record. Masters record at the time. It's been tied since, and that vaults him from 28th to second. And for a brief time, early on the back nine, he was only 3 shots behind Nicklaus. So he had made up 8 shots in just about 10 or 11 holes, and he missed some easy putts on the back nine. He said if his putter had been really hot, he could have shot a 60 or 61. He was playing so well. He ended up shooting a 65 that day, which was 1 shot off the Masters record, and that put him right back in contention.
And the funny thing is, typically at Augusta, it is the back nine where people make those incredible runs. It's not necessarily true that it's the front nine. That's really quite unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, because on the back nine you have those par 5s where you see a lot of eagles on 13 and 15.
Yeah, absolutely. And then overall, how did the leaderboard change then? You mentioned Johnny Miller was up to second, but what did it look like after the third round?
Well, Miller was up to third at -5. Nicklaus, with his 73, had lost his 5-shot lead, and he was now 1 shot behind. And very quietly, Tom Weiskopf shot a 66. He got almost no mention in the press. The guy's leading the tournament at -9, and he's going almost unnoticed because the press were so enamored talking about the dream pairing with Nicklaus and Palmer, and then Johnny Miller's historic front nine. So the weekend sets up with the 3 guys who are, the final round sets up with the 3 guys who are the 3 top players in the world at that moment: Weiskopf, Nicklaus, and Miller, all in contention on the final day.
Wow, and that's almost like your perfect Masters, isn't it? When you've got all the top players in the world really coming through. It's really cool when that happens.
Absolutely.
So then, on the last day, as we always say, it starts in the back nine. So there was incredible drama coming down that stretch. Please tell us about it.
So when we got to when everybody had finished the 14th hole, you had Weiskopf and Miller playing in the final group, and Nicklaus and Watson playing right ahead of them. And through 14 holes, Weiskopf was still 1 shot ahead of Nicklaus, and Nicklaus was 1 shot ahead of Miller. So it's really tight. Weiskopf's at -11, Nicklaus -10, and Miller at -9. And so it's so exciting because these are the 3 best players in the world, and they're all right there. And so now Weiskopf, it's very interesting. Weiskopf is now at this moment 4 holes away, if he can hold on, from his first green jacket. He had come in second in the Masters 3 times and had never won it. And so this was his quest to win a Masters, and it's right there for him. And then on the 15th hole, Nicklaus hits his tee shot in the fairway. This is the the reachable in 2 par 5 that we were just talking about. Nicklaus is 220 yards away. Now, if you recall, the 15th hole, there's water both in front of and behind the green, so it's high risk, high reward, high risk. He hits one of the best 2-iron shots of his life. It nearly goes in the hole. It rolls past about 15 feet. And he misses the eagle putt, but he's got a tap-in par. And now Nicklaus and Weiskopf are now tied at 11 under. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The 16th tee at Augusta is right next to the 15th green. So the players can see each other. And as after Nicklaus finished, he strategically makes sure that he tees off after Weiskopf and Miller have hit their approaches into the green at 15, because he doesn't want to be disturbed if there's a big roar for Weiskopf and Miller. So, and this keeps happening in the next 15 minutes, where each player is watching to see what the player is doing at the other hole to make sure they're not hitting a shot that could get disrupted.
Thanks for listening to Link by Golf. I also co-host a new podcast with Colin Gray called Both Sides of Par. Every episode explores the different sides of the game, from drills and practice habits to course strategy, mindset, equipment, and the realities golfers face at every handicap level. If you enjoy the conversations here, I think you'll really love this one too. Follow Both Sides of Par now on your favourite podcast platform so you don't miss the first episodes. Just search for Both Sides of Par or go to bothpar.com. Now let's get back to the pod.
Now, Weiskopf and Miller both hit pretty good shots. Weiskopf's approach shot at 15 lands on the middle of the green, but it bounces back into the rough, so he's got to chip back. Miller hits his second shot on 15 on the green, 30 feet from the pin. So he's got, at that moment, an eagle putt. If he makes that eagle putt, it would be a 3-way tie at minus 11. So now that those two have hit their approach shots, now Nicklaus can finally tee off in 16, and he hits a poor shot on the par 3. This is the par 3 over water on 16, very famous hole. He leaves his ball 40 feet short of the hole, and it's way below the hole. He's got a long, steep uphill putt to the flag there. Now, next, Tom Watson tees off. Now, this is not Tom Watson in his prime. This is a young Tom Watson, the first time he's ever playing in contention in a major. And he puts his tee shot on 16 in the water, and he puts his second tee shot on 16 in the water. And he finds his third tee shot. He's hitting 5 now from the tee. He finally gets it on the green. He's completely out of contention, but in an unbelievable stroke of luck for Jack Nicklaus, Watson's ball lands right behind Nicklaus's. So this means that Nicklaus is going to get to see pretty much the exact same putt he has when Watson has to putt first. Now, meanwhile, before that takes place, Miller and Weiskopf are back on the 15th green, and Weiskopf's chip up from the behind the green lands 12 feet from the hole, so he's got a 12-foot birdie putt. Now, Miller takes his 30-foot eagle putt, just misses it. He taps in for a birdie, so he moves to minus 10. So now Miller is just 1 behind Nicklaus and Weiskopf, but Weiskopf drains his 12-foot birdie putt. And now Weiskopf takes the outright lead. It's now Weiskopf minus 12, Nicklaus minus 11, Miller minus 10. And CBS television network did an unbelievable job here. As soon as Weiskopf's putt goes in, and you can watch this on YouTube. You can watch the whole 75 Masters on YouTube. As soon as Weiskopf's putt goes in, they turn the camera to Nicklaus, and he looks disturbed. He's looking back from the 16th green at it. He looks disturbed. And then they quickly switch back to Weiskopf, and Weiskopf's got this, turns and takes a look towards Nicklaus, and you can just see it, that he's thinking to himself, take that, Jack. And so Weiskopf is now back in the lead by himself, and he's only got 3 holes to go, 3 holes away from winning that first green jacket. And that camera's flipping back and forth was just out, incredible. But it gets even better because now Watson's already hit his putt. Nicklaus is now lining up this 40-foot putt, and he cans it. And very uncharacteristically, Nicklaus leaps in the air, and as he leaps in the air, he twists his body and turns so that when he comes back down to the ground, he's facing the tee. And Weiskopf and Miller are on the tee at this point. And
Brilliant.
so they see this. They see this celebration that Nicklaus is going through that puts Nicklaus back into a tie for the lead with Weiskopf. And CBS again does a great job because they have a shot of Weiskopf and Miller just looking down at the ground like they're just dejected. What Nicklaus has just hit the dagger into them with that 40-footer. And that gave Nicklaus momentum, and he plays 17 and 18 well, and he finishes 18 at -12.
And that's what I was just going to ask. So how did it finish up on 18? What was the eventual outcome on that?
So Nicklaus is in at -12, and Miller had birdied 17. So he's at -11. He's 1 shot off. And Weiskopf had been at -12 also, but Weiskopf, he must have just been rattled by Nicklaus's putt. He hit a terrible tee shot at 16. It didn't go in the water like Watson, but it landed 40 yards short of the pin, well short of the green. It's just terrible tee shot at that moment on 16. And so Weiskopf ends up bogeying the hole. So Weiskopf bogeys 16 to go 1 behind Nicklaus. He pars 17. So both Weiskopf and Miller now come to the 18th tee, 1 shot behind. Each of them needs a birdie to get into a playoff with Nicklaus. And they both hit great tee shots. In fact, Miller's in the middle of the fairway. Weiskopf hits the longest drive on 18 of the entire 4 rounds. He had only a wedge to the green, and a wedge to the green on 18 at Augusta is really something. So
especially
Miller
back in 1975 as well. That's incredible.
Yeah. So Miller hits his approach shot 15 feet to the right of the flag. So he's going to have a pretty good chance for a birdie. Weiskopf hits his wedge 8 feet to the right of the flag, and a very interesting twist, like another one of these dramatic twists that just usually don't happen in real life. Weiskopf's on the exact same line as Miller, just like Nicklaus was on the exact same line as Watson on 16. So Weiskopf's going to get, regardless of what Miller does, Weiskopf's going to get to see the break after Miller putts. So Miller putts first naturally, and his ball slides just to the left of the hole, and he is devastated. He mopes around the green for a long time. He is now he's now out. He finishes 1 shot behind. Now Weiskopf has a chance. If he makes an 8-footer, he's going to tie Nicklaus, and unlike today, it's going to be an 18-hole playoff. Back then, it was still 18-hole playoff. And he knows the break. He knows the break. He putts it, and it's right on line, and then it just hangs up. It never turns. Miller's ball had turned. He had missed it a little to the left. So Weiskopf aimed just right of the hole, and it never turned. And with that, he finished at -11 also, and Jack Nicklaus won his 5th green jacket, 5th time he had won the Masters.
So that was his 5th time, and then, of course, he won his 6th in 1986, and there was something in the aftermath of the tournament in 1986, there was a touching moment
another
to that. So what was that?
So another kind of unbelievable twist of fate here. So Tom Weiskopf finished his career coming in 2nd in the Masters 4 times, never winning it. But 11 years later, as you mentioned, in 1986, Jack Nicklaus won the Masters for the 6th time. And that day, in 1986, Tom Weiskopf was the color analyst for CBS at the 16th hole. And he was in the booth with Jim Nantz, who's the lead anchor today for CBS broadcasts. And if you recall, Nicklaus had started the day way behind. Greg Norman looked like he was going to go and win his Masters for the first time. And Nicklaus makes a huge comeback, and 16 was a critical hole for him. And so when Nicklaus was getting ready to tee off at 16, Jim Nantz says to Tom Weiskopf, "What do you think Jack is thinking right now?" And Weiskopf gave this precious answer. He said, "If I knew the way he thought, I would have won this tournament." And I think he was laughing when he said that, but I think he was dead serious. I think he really thought if he could have ever been in the mind of Jack Nicklaus, he would have known how to win the Masters instead of coming second. And then something really amazing happened, and you can hear this. You can hear it on YouTube if you pull up the 1986 Masters. And I've never heard anybody do this before. Weiskopf, who's supposed to be the color analyst, he's speaking as though he's coaching Nicklaus, like he's in Nicklaus's ear, and he says to him, "Make a good golf swing. Your destiny is right here." And it's really unbelievable what happened. Of course, Nicklaus couldn't hear that, but Nicklaus hit one of the great shots in Masters history at that 16th hole. He nearly made a hole-in-one, and with that birdie, Nicklaus went on to win that 6th green jacket.
That's an incredible coincidence, isn't it? How that's tied them together over those two Masters wins for Jack and all that time in between, 11 years.
And that's why I've got 3 chapters in the book. The only golf tournament that I had more than one chapter, because the drama here was so incredible, and I didn't want to miss out on any of these really precious things that happened.
Absolutely. And then staying with Jack, but we're going to go back in time again. You like your time traveling, of course, Len. We're going to go back to the 1972 Open. So Jack was thinking about the Grand Slam, and why was that the case going into the 1972 Open?
So in 72, Nicklaus is 32, and he's really in his prime. And he starts the year by winning the Masters wire to wire in 1972, and then he wins the U.S. Open wire to wire. So he's just playing unbelievable. And this is at this time in his career at 32, he doesn't care about anything else besides majors. So he is thinking Grand Slam. In fact, he doesn't even play another tournament after the U.S. Open. He just is getting ready for the 3rd major of the year at that time, the Open Championship, what we call the British Open. And so he went to, it was at Muirfield in Scotland, which was great for him because he loves Muirfield. And he went there a week early. And all he's thinking about is winning the Grand Slam. He was the first player to come to the British Open, or I'll call it the Open Championship. He's the first player to come to the Open Championship since 1960, having won the Masters and the U.S. Open. Arnold Palmer had come to the Open Championship, having won the Masters and U.S. Open back in 1960.
Wow, that's incredible. And there's not been many people have come in, and even since then, having won the Masters and the U.S. Open. I think Jordan Spieth might have been the last one to do that. Brilliant. And then I was just going to ask, who were the other favourites going into the tournament at Muirfield?
So there were really 3 top players in the world at that moment. You had, of course, Nicklaus, and then Lee Trevino, who had won the U.S. Open and the Open Championship the year before in 71. And Tony Jacklin from the United Kingdom had won the 1969 Open Championship and the 1970 U.S. Open. Those 3 players together had won 8 of the past 12 majors going into the Open Championship in 1972. And the odds makers had those 3 as the 3 favorites to win.
So they'd won 2/3 of the previous 12 majors. That's incredible. Just between the 3 of them.
That's one of the real interesting things about this sports time travel, because I go back and I kind of park myself at that moment in time and see what's going on. And, and so I pieced together that they had won 8 of the last 12 majors. And that to me makes it even more interesting.
And that's incredibly unusual. I can't think of that apart from maybe Tiger on a run, having so many at one time, but I can't think that's been done since, right? Having 3 players having won 8 within 3 years. That's an incredible setup in terms of their dominance of the majors just between the 3 of them.
Yeah, I think these days I really think the club technology has evened things out a lot. Nicklaus was hitting real woods back then.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I remember playing with real woods. They were much harder to control. And nowadays I think the clubs make it so that more players can play at a higher level. And I think that's why you don't get just a small group of players dominating like you did back then.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If you're technically capable of hitting the ball absolutely straight out the sweet spot, and then somebody's maybe like consistently 2 millimeters off, there's not really any difference in outcome these days. I think that's definitely the difference. You're right, the equipment's definitely been a leveler for sure. But then in terms of the Muirfield Open in 72, what things were happening in that first round at such a great venue?
So in the first round, you had the three favorites all shoot well. Jacklin 69, Nicklaus 70, Trevino 71. But one player is ahead of all of them at a 68. It's a virtual unknown Englishman named Peter Tupling. He was a second-year pro, and he had only won 300 pounds the entire year going into the Open Championship. And here he is leading the Open Championship ahead of these three favorites after round one.
And that's the great thing about the Open. It's, of course, well named. You get club pros, you get amateurs, and I think it's the beauty of the tournament, even still today. If you've got a scratch handicap, you can enter qualifying. If you're a PGA professional or just a tour professional, you can obviously enter the Open as well. And it just continues that great spirit and magic of the event, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so then in terms of the second round, something really rare happened there. What was that, Len?
Yeah, incredibly rare. So a young Johnny Miller, this is before his 11 wins stretch in 16 months in 74 and 75. Miller's on the par 5, 558-yard fifth hole on the second day, and he hits a 3-wood from 280 yards, and it goes in the hole for an albatross, a double eagle. It was the first double eagle in the Open Championship since young Tom Morris in 1870, 102 years earlier.
That's incredible. And the numbers you're given there, from 280-something yards with a 3-wood, I mean, that sounds like modern numbers. That's incredible, the distance he's done that from, isn't it?
It was so far, he didn't even know it had gone in the hole. He didn't know it had gone in until he got up to the green and found the ball in the cup.
My goodness, that is incredible. And then, in terms of round 3, there was an incredible finish by Lee Trevino. So what was that like?
So Lee Trevino comes to the 14th hole in the third round and birdies it. And then he birdies the 15th hole. So 2 birdies in a row. And then he hits his tee shot on 16, a par 3, into a bunker next to the green. And it's a really terrible lie. It's up against the lip. And he hits the ball out of the bunker, and it's going on a line drive. It's going to sail over the green. But it hits the flagstick, it drops straight down, and goes into the cup for a birdie. Just unbelievable. So now that's 3 birdies in a row. And then he gets a routine birdie on 17, 4 birdies in a row. And then on the 18th, a par 4, his second shot lands in the right rough about 30 feet from the hole, and he chips it in. 5 straight birdies to finish the third round. And with that, he tied the course record of 66.
And the one in the middle that's hit the pin, I mean, that could have been 5 or 6. That could have been a bogey or a double. If it's hit the pin at such speed, at such a height, that's incredible.
Yeah, he was headed for disaster on that hole.
Wow. And with that finish, what did the leaderboard look like after round 3?
So after round 3, you've got Trevino leading at -6, Jacklin 1 shot behind at -5, and they're clearly ahead of the rest. You've got Doug Sanders at -2, Brian Barnes at -1, and Jack Nicklaus is even. So Nicklaus is 6 shots back. He's got to come from 6 back if he wants to win the third leg of the Grand Slam. You also had Johnny Miller at +1 and Arnold Palmer at +2, tied with Peter Tupling. I can't imagine how Peter Tupling felt being tied with Arnold Palmer after 3 rounds of the Open Championship.
Good on Peter Tupling. That's a name that I'll have forever now. And in Nicklaus, you mentioned they started the final round 6 shots back. So what happened in the early part? Did they make a charge?
So Nicklaus told a reporter before the round that he set a target of 65. He thinks if he shoots 65, maybe he's got a chance. And so he goes out on a mission. And on the second hole, 349 yards, he nearly drives the green. Now that's not so surprising today, but back then that's just unbelievable. He drives the green and he makes a birdie. So he's birdied the second hole. He birdies the third hole. He reaches the seventh hole at 3 under for the day. And when Trevino bogeyed, playing a few groups behind him, when Trevino bogeyed the fifth hole, Nicklaus is all of a sudden only 2 shots off the lead. So in the first 7 holes, he's made up 4 shots. And then Nicklaus keeps birdieing. He birdies the 9th to go out in 32 on the front 9, and now he's just 1 shot behind Nicklaus after the front 9. He's back in the tournament in prime position going into the back 9.
Fantastic. And then you mentioned Len Trevino there. What happened to him in the 7th hole?
Unbelievable what happens to him on the 7th hole. He's putting for par, and a large hare darts around the green and breaks his concentration. He was just in the middle of his putting stroke when this hare runs onto the green and starts running circles around the green. And Trevino misses the putt. He slams his putter into the ground, and with that, he fell into a tie with Nicklaus, who's already finished the front 9. So now Jack Nicklaus has made up the entire ground in just 9 holes.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, some of the drama that you're describing there, Len, across these 2 tournaments going back, it would just make for incredible television, obviously made for incredible television and viewing for the people back then, but can you imagine that was going around now and you did social media age as well? The views would be off the charts, wouldn't they?
Absolutely, and it's sad because a lot of these great tournaments are forgotten, and that's why I wanted to write the book, to share with people these incredible, dramatic stories that are almost impossible to believe, but they're right there in the newspaper archives.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Nicklaus had to back off a putt as well in the 11th, and he's shot in 15th. So what happened there?
So Nicklaus is on the 11th hole getting ready to putt, and there's this big roar because he doesn't know what it's for, but it's because Len Trevino had just eagled the 9th hole. And then so he has to back off, go do start his whole routine again, and Nicklaus is notoriously slow on the green. So this is taking a long time for him to back off and start his routine again. He's ready to putt, and then there's another roar, even louder, because Tony Jacklin has just eagled the 9th hole.
My goodness.
But Nicklaus has extraordinary concentration powers. He prepares again, and he makes his birdie putt. And now all of a sudden, we've got a 3-way tie for the lead. I'm sorry, not a 3-way tie yet. He's back into a tie for the lead with Trevino at -6, and Jacklin's 1 behind them.
My goodness. And then on that back 9, some real drama was about to kick off. So when Jack Nicklaus got to the 16th and Trevino had just and Jacklin had just completed the 14th, what was the leaderboard looking like there?
So when Jack finished 15, we had all 3 players tied. So it's just incredible. The 3 favorites coming into the tournament are now all at -6 when Jack's finished the 15th and Trevino and Jacklin have finished the 14th. So it just can't get any more exciting than this at that point. And then
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, then Nicklaus then misses a 3-foot putt on 16. So he falls 1 behind Jacklin and Trevino. Nicklaus pars 17 to stay 1 behind. And then he's got a birdie putt at 18. If he makes that, he's back into a tie, a 3-way tie. And he narrowly misses that. So now Nicklaus is the leader in the clubhouse. And it's really ironic because he said, if I could shoot a 65, my target's a 65, I think I can win. He shot a 66.
There you go.
So he needed one of those short birdie putts that he missed to get that 65. So he's in, leader in the clubhouse, but 1 shot behind Trevino and Jacklin, who are at -6 as they get to the 17th hole.
And 17, as much as I didn't witness it at the time, I know that's really well documented, and I mean, clearly you've gone back as well. So talk us through the 17th, Len, because I think there's an incredible amount of different things that happen that really transform the outcome of that tournament.
Yeah, this is another one with just unbelievable twists. So Trevino and Jacklin are tied. They're playing together. They have 2 holes to go. Trevino hooks his drive into a bunker while Jacklin hits straight down the middle. So it's clearly advantage Jacklin. And Trevino, all he could do was just hit a recovery shot out of the bunker. And now he's so far still from the green. This is a par 5. He's so far from the green that on his 3rd shot, he still has to hit a wood. And he hits that shot, and it lands in the foot-high rough short of the green. Meanwhile, Jacklin hits his approach shot just a little short of the green in the fairway. So it's still very much advantage Jacklin. Jacklin's going to be chipping for his 3rd shot. Trevino's going to be in this foot-high rough hitting his 4th shot. And so as they're walking up to the green, Trevino says to Jacklin, "I'm through. It's yours." So Trevino just thinks he has no chance.
My
So
goodness.
now next to hit is Trevino hitting his 4th shot out of this foot-high rough, and he hits it through the green into the rough on the other side of the green. So now he's going to be hitting 5 from the rough. Jacklin is chipping his 3rd shot, and he chips to 18 feet from the hole. So Jacklin's going to be putting for birdie, a makeable putt. Trevino is chipping from off the green for par. So Trevino hits a bump and run, and as it rolls, he sees it's heading straight for the cup, and he starts to dance before it even drops in the cup. He has miraculously saved par with a chip in.
That's incredible. And then what was the impact on Tony Jacklin then with Lee Trevino having such an incredible outcome there?
Yeah, Tony Jacklin's got an 18-foot putt for birdie, so he can take a 1-shot lead. His putt goes 2 feet past the hole, so he's got a 2-footer for par. So they both, if they're both par, they're going to the 18th tied. But Jacklin misses the 2-footer, and he makes a bogey. So just an incredible turn of events. It looked like Lee was headed for a double bogey, at least a bogey, and Trevino made a par. And Jacklin looked like he had a reasonable chance for birdie, certain par, and he gets a bogey. And so now Lee Trevino goes to the last hole with a 1-shot lead.
And I think the thing that's incredible about that, just that 17th hole, is that almost shapes, I wouldn't say it necessarily shapes the full remainder of Tony Jacklin's career, because he obviously became an incredible Ryder Cup captain and had great success, and he's a wonderful person. He's really brilliant to listen to, but I don't think his golf career was ever the same afterwards. It had an incredible impact on him, didn't it?
Well, yeah, very well might be, because it impacted him on the next tee. Trevino hit a perfect drive on 18, and Jacklin immediately got into trouble on 18, and he ended up bogeying the hole. And so Trevino had made a routine par and won the British Open for the 2nd straight year.
And he basically came from nowhere in 17 after 3 shots. You're saying he's got no chance. And then suddenly he's chipped in. Jacklin's had a 3-putt and he's won the tournament. That's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, unbelievable turn of events in that 17th hole.
And what about unexpected leader, first-round leader, Mr. Tupling? What happened to him in the end?
So Peter Tupling, who was still on the leaderboard at the bottom of the leaderboard at the end of 3 rounds, shot an 81 on the final day, and he actually finished 18 shots behind Trevino, and he earned 150 pounds, and in dollar terms, that put him over $1,000 for the year.
Oh, good on Mr. Tupling. That's awesome. Brilliant. And I'm sure that not many people would remember his name, but they might remember it now from that Open. They tend to focus on Jacklin and Trevino. Brilliant. So then, Len, we're going to go back even further in time, and this one's going to take us out of here, but we've got the 1922 Open, or British Open as you guys would call it in the States. So you've got a bit of a personal connection to that one. Can you tell us about that?
So the Open Championship in 1922 was played in Sandwich, and that's just less than 10 miles from Canterbury. They were at Royal St. George's Golf Club in Sandwich. And I spent a whole year in Canterbury. I went to the University of Kent at Canterbury for a year and spent some time over in Sandwich. So I was particularly interested in this 1922 Open Championship because it took place well, I was interested for two reasons. I wanted to experience some of these golfers that I had heard the names but knew nothing about. And I also wanted to experience an Open Championship that took place near Canterbury.
Yeah, and I've played Royal St. George's. Let me tell you, that is one tough golf course. That was one that probably broke me back in the day. But rather than focusing on me, what about this tournament? Tell us about that.
So one of the interesting things is, at this point in time, the Open Championship had never been won by a player born in America. And in fact, the year before, in 1921, was the first time that an American won the Open Championship, but it was an American who was actually born in St. Andrews, Scotland, and that's Jock Hutchinson.
Right.
But coming into this 1922 Open Championship, it was pretty clear that it was going to be very difficult for a British citizen to win, because all the favorites were foreigners. Probably the top favorite was a guy from Australia named Joe Kirkwood, and he was a real character. He was a trick shot artist. He could do things I've never heard of before, like driving both right-handed and left-handed, and teeing a ball off of somebody's foot.
Wow.
And he was demonstrating these trick shots, and he was actually planning an around the world exhibition tour with the American Walter Hagen. But in the 4 weeks prior to the Open Championship, he was playing at a otherworldly level. He played in a professional golf tournament in Scotland and won it by 13 shots. And then he had a match play event against George Duncan. Now, George Duncan was another Scot who had won the Open Championship in 1920, and Kirkwood beats him. And then he plays another exhibition match. This is just right before the Open Championship with the defending champion, Jock Hutchinson, and he beats him. So he's the favorite to win. But also there's also three Americans. Walter Hagen, who at this point in time had won 2 U.S. Opens and 1 American PGA Championship, and had finished 6th in the Open Championship the year before. And the famous American sports writer Grant Land Rice was picking Walter Hagen to win. And then there was also another American, Jim Barnes, who was born in England but had moved to America about 15 years earlier. And he was the winner of the 1921 U.S. Open, had also finished 6th the year before in the Open Championship. And several people were picking him to win. And then, of course, you had the defending champion, Jock Hutchinson, another American. So you've got 3 Americans there. And then another guy who is considered to have a very strong chance is George Duncan, who Hutchinson had just beaten in that match. So Duncan was the winner in 1920. The London Daily Mirror was picking George Duncan. And then there was 52-year-old Harry Vardon. Interesting thing about Harry Vardon was, not only was he a 7-time winner of the Open Championship, but he had won his first Open Championship 29 years earlier in 1893. And he was one of the favorites because the last time they had played the Open at Royal St. George's, he had been the winner. So that counts for something too. So you've got an interesting set of favorites going into this Open Championship.
Absolutely, and it's a grueling schedule for the championship. So talk us through what the schedule was like, Len.
So first, they had to play qualifying rounds. They have 225 players that had made it to the Open, but they've got to first play what they called the qualifying rounds before what they called the championship proper. And if you didn't make it through the qualifying rounds, you didn't win any money at all. So the qualifying rounds were played over 2 days. With so many players, they couldn't play them all at Royal St. George's. They played on another course nearby called Prince's. So everybody played 18 holes at Prince's and 18 holes at Royal St. George's over the 2 days. And so after the qualifying rounds, all the major favorites had made it, and 80 players were then in the championship proper, which would start 2 days later after an off day.
Wow. That's a lot of golf within. And it's interesting, the Open's changed now, although they have brought back Monday qualifying. There's going to be a special event this year, but they've tried to give the players a bit more time now before the championship. But these guys were, coming from all over the place, and then they're straight into basically 6 rounds of golf in 7 days. That's pretty phenomenal.
And it didn't matter, like, even Jock Hutchinson, who had won the year before, had to play in the qualifying rounds. Everybody has to play in the qualifying rounds back then.
So there's no exemption at all. It's the only exemption is to get to qualify, and then you have to play your way through. That's incredible. I hadn't understood that. I thought even defending champions would have had some form of exemption next year. But then, in the morning of the first round, there was something that happened that was really incredible. What was that, Len?
In the first round?
In the morning of the first round.
So you got all these favorites that are from outside the United Kingdom. But in the first round, the old British players took over. The leaders after the first round were 45-year-old Ted Ray and 51-year-old J.H. Taylor. J.H. Taylor had won the British Open in 1894. So,
what? Wow.
So yeah, he was 51, so he had won 28 years earlier. So they're leading up to the first round. Now the other interesting thing about what they called the championship proper, is that they played 36 holes on the first day and 36 holes on the second day. They played the whole 72 holes in 2 days. So it's a really grueling.
So wait a minute. So I thought it was like 6 rounds in 7 days. So you're saying it was actually 6 rounds in like 5 days or something?
Yeah, 6 rounds in 5 days with 1 day off in between the qualifying and the championship proper. So that is really grueling.
And I bet they weren't playing 4.5, 5 hour rounds, right? They'd be rattling around probably in 3 hours and having lunch in between. Brilliant. And then what happened to J.H. Taylor in the end for the tournament?
J.H. Taylor, so he actually had a pretty good tournament, and he was in contention all the way into the last day. In fact, he had been fairly far behind on the last day, but he made 3. Here's another interesting thing: they didn't talk in terms of birdie, par, bogey back then. They talked in terms of whether you got a 3, 4, or a 5. So the newspapers said he made 3s on 15 and 16 in the final round, and if he would have made 4s on 17 and 18, he would have tied the leader in the clubhouse after the final round. So he was right there, but he had a disastrous hole on the final hole. He needed 3 shots to get out of a bunker on the final hole. And so he ended up finishing 4 shots behind the eventual winner. So J.H. Taylor at 51 ended up having a really great Open Championship 28 years after he had won it.
And that's incredible. Thomas Bjorn, of course, was impacted by having a lot of trouble in a bunker. I think he took 3 to get out. So although it wasn't the same hole, but it's amazing how these things come back through history and happen again. And then what did the leaderboard look like with 18 holes to go overall? Who were the favourites and what was it going like?
So with 18 holes to go, you've got the defending champion, Jock Hutchinson, has a 1-shot lead over Taylor, and 2 shots behind are Hagen and Barnes. And then 6 shots back is the 1920 champion, Duncan, and 9 shots back is the guy who had been playing so well before the tournament, Joe Kirkwood. So you've still got a lot of the favorites right there. Kirkwood's a little out of it, but you've got Duncan, Hagen, Barnes, Hutchinson, all right there within a few shots of each other going into the afternoon round of the final day.
This is unbelievable. So then Hutchinson had some trouble in the 4th hole of the final round. What was that then? What happened to him?
So it was described kind of comically by George Greenwood, who was the golf writer for the London Daily Telegraph. Hutchinson on the 4th hole hits his second shot beyond a small wooden fence and into a kitchen garden, as it was described. And Greenwood wrote in the Telegraph, That awful garden with its cabbages and onions and the scoffers sitting on the fence will live long in Hutchinson's memory as he took a 7 on the 4th hole.
That's funny. And that hole is the one with the massive bunker. Did it? I wonder if it had the massive bunker at the time, the one that's about 60 foot tall. And I'm just remembering there's houses. I remember now there are houses behind that green. That's really funny. Brilliant. And then Hagen finished with a score of 300 for the championship. He was the leader in the clubhouse. How many other people were in it and what happened?
So the interesting thing is they didn't do tee times the way they do it now, where if you're leading, you're in the final group. If you're, third or fourth, you're in the second to final group. They didn't do it that way. Hagen was in third place going into the final round in the afternoon of day 2, but he plays like almost 3 hours ahead of the last group. So Hagen gets into the clubhouse with a score of even 300, with a 72 on the final round, and the 72 back then at Royal St. George's was a sensational score. So Hagen's the leader in the clubhouse, and now he's got to wait a very long time to see all these other players come in.
Wow. And then they reached a point at the end where there's only one British hope left. So who was that and how did they finish?
Yeah, so players come in and nobody's better than Hagen's 300, but there's one player left on the course who still has a chance, and it was George Duncan. So Duncan had been 6 shots back going into the final round. He had shot an 81 in the morning, and that's what put him so far behind. So he's going to need a 68 to tie Hagen, and that's just an unbelievable score. But he shoots a 34 on the front 9, and so he's got a chance. And then he gets to 17, needing like Taylor before him. He gets to 17, needing 2 fours, a 4 on 17 and a 4 on 18 to tie Hagen. He gets the 4 on 17, so now he just needs a 4 on 18. His tee shot on 18's in the fairway. His second shot, a wood into the green. It's so interesting. These guys are hitting woods into the green on what we would think is a par 4, whereas these days, a lot of times they're hitting wedges into the green. His second shot, a 2 wood, lands on the green, but rolls off the green and down a little slope to the left. Now, at this moment, Hagen is standing at the 18th green watching, and he's standing right next to George Greenwood, the reporter from the London Daily Telegraph. And he says to Greenwood, and Greenwood published this in the paper the next day, he said to him, "If Duncan knows as much about that shot as I do, he is certain to get the ball dead." So I had to figure out what he means. What he meant was getting the ball dead back then meant you if you hit a chip shot, it landed at a tap-in level.
Yeah,
but his ball ends up 20 feet from the cup. So now he's got to make this 20-footer to force the playoff. And another reporter, Arthur Draper of the New York Times, New York Tribune, not New York Times, New York Tribune, reported the next day that at this moment, when Duncan needs the 20-footer to tie, one of the officials said he begged the crowd to get down on its knees and pray. and Draper said they all obeyed the first command. They all got down on their knees, and he said they probably obeyed the second command too.
That's funny. And then the London Evening Standard had some descriptions for the finish as well. What did they have to say?
So Duncan, his 20-foot putt stops 3 inches short. So he finished with a course record 69 and 1 shot behind Hagen. And so Hagen won the British Open by 1 shot. They all just thought it was the greatest tournament they'd ever seen. In the London Evening Standard, a reporter named H.H. Hilton wrote, "In the whole history of professional golf championships, there has never been a more dramatic finish." And that's how I titled the chapter of the book. I made it the last chapter of the book, and I titled it "Never a More Dramatic Finish."
Fantastic. Well, Len, it's been really fantastic having you on. I really appreciate you taking the time to take the listeners through it. I've been fascinated. And it makes you want to go back and watch those videos of the Masters. I wish we'd footage of these really old ones back in the 20s. That would be so cool to watch. But thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate you doing that.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Len for his time and for taking us on such a brilliant journey through golf's most dramatic moments, from Augusta in '75 all the way back to Sandwich in 1922. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and switch on automatic downloads wherever you're listening. You can also find the show on Instagram at Link by Golf Podcast for future episodes, clips and insights. And if you have a moment to leave a review, it really does help us reach more golfers just like you. I'm Ross McGuire. Thanks for listening.
Lomond Golf Tours have helped thousands of guests build bespoke golf trips to create a magical experience. Travel in style with our executive chauffeur travel, whether it's golf on a major championship venue or one of our hidden gems, 5-star accommodation or a boutique bed and breakfast, or is it whiskey tasting on a private boat? Lomond Golf Tours are here to help build the tour of a lifetime. Whether you're celebrating a special occasion or ticking it off your bucket list, embark on a trip that you'll remember forever. Visit www.lomondgolftours.com.